Welcome to the tutorial for how to facilitate session 5 of a teen wellness circle. Now, before we start, we just want to take a second to thank you for putting in all the time and energy it is required to learn how to and then to facilitate a teen wellness circle. I'm sure the teens in your community are appreciating it, and I know it's always a wonderful thing to offer teens. So just on that note, thank you for doing what you're doing. Because without you, this program doesn't happen, and teens don't have chances to talk and set goals and that sort of thing. So thank you. Now we're going to turn to our facilitator guide and the program workbook, and we'll get started. In session 5, we're going to focus on an important understanding about change, and that is the systemic nature of change, which is what the students will find in their program workbook. In your facilitator guide, however, it is entitled Systems and Change, which is something we need to change. So the idea is, with the systemic dynamics of change, is that when somebody in a system is trying to make a change, the system can either contribute to helping that person make the change or become a barrier to that. We will talk more about it later, but that's the general gist of things. Then take a look on page 56. You'll see both the purpose and the objectives listed there. You want to take some time to read that. And then when you're ready to begin your wellness circle, session 5, you're going to do this similar to what we've done before. You're going to have a gathering, a welcome, centering time, and some journaling. This time you might bring a picture of a mobile or something, which will help in the teaching of the lesson. You want to do some sort of a check-in, like you always do, something, maybe it could even refer back to something that you talked about in session 4, and then some centering time, letting them know that we're going to be talking about how everything is connected. And during their journaling time, you may have them think about a change that has happened in their life, be it at home or school or in their community, that not only impacted the person who was right in the change, in the center of the change, but those around them. It helps them begin to think about the systemic nature of change. Then, before you move on to the teaching segment, take a few minutes to have them share the thoughts that they have about this and have a little discussion about that. And then here, we'll go ahead and start with our teaching segment.
Let's take a look now at the participant workbook on page 21, and we'll see the session 5, Systemic Dynamics and Change. And immediately you see that graphic of forming, storming, norming, performing, with a little arrow going off to the side about false norming. First, just let me explain this idea of what do we mean by a system? A system is it's helpful to think of it in terms of maybe relational systems, how everything's connected to one another. Every one of us lives in multiple systems. We may like to think that we're all these kind of individuals determining our own, individual fate and path, and there's certainly truth to that. But we also live in systems. Our families are systems, the people we live with, the people we work with, the people we go to school with. If we're in an extracurricular activity, the group that we're in that activity with, the band, the orchestra, the quartet, the team, the drama group, the cast of the play, the class, each individual classroom, a class that a student is in, is a system. And what we're really looking at here, we've been focusing a lot with the zones and the J-curve about the individual path of change. And what we're really trying to bring to light here is that when an individual is changing, they will either find support from the system around them, or they may find that it creates some kind of a storm and they actually create some kind of a barrier. So this forming, storming, norming, performing, you can kind of have some fun with that and just teach them with that. It's good to think of examples for them. Anytime we go through a transition, right? Like when they transition from middle school to high school, or if they've ever moved, or if they've ever entered a new team or a new extracurricular activity, the first thing they're going to probably experience is some kind of storm. The storm in this is kind of like the growth zone. If it's really a big storm, then it's more like the panic zone. And it creates disruption in their life and then also in the system. An example might be if a teacher has to leave mid-year because of health reasons, and a new teacher comes into the classroom to finish that semester or that quarter. That's going to be a disruption. That's going to create a storm. The new norm is over, and now they're going to have to find a new norm. So on the other side of storming is finding a new norm as the system begins to reform itself with the new people that are in it, and then they can begin to perform again. False norming is simply, pretending that the change isn't happening or that's not a big deal. A very common one for teens when they want to make a change is that it may mean a change in friend group. It may take them away from their friends. Maybe if one of the teens starts dating, and then their friends say, "Hey, you're not around anymore. You're no fun. We never see you anymore." Or if a teen wants to change a habit around alcohol or drugs, and that takes them away from a group maybe that they were in where that was happening, they're probably not going to get a lot of support and encouragement for that change. They're going to get some resistance for that. A student who wants to pursue something that is different, maybe than a different path than what their family wants for them or expects for them, then the system may or may not, and may create a storm, and then they will have to work through that. So it's just our way of helping them to understand that they're all interconnected. Holly mentioned in the opening that we like to, if you have a picture of a mobile, that's just a really nice way of showing it. Remember, we used the mobile early on to talk about in a sense, the inner systems of our lives, the 8 areas of wellness. But here we're talking about how when one part of the mobile changes, it's going to affect the other. And then also, as Holly also said, sometimes there's a change in our system and the system around us that is affecting us. So a change at home can obviously affect a teen, a change in their friend group. Their best friend moves. Their best friend, decides that they don't want to be best friends anymore, or a relationship, maybe a better example, a romantic relationship, a person breaks up with the teen, and now that system is, they're going to be thrown into some kind of a storm. So it's just a helpful way for them to think about that their changes are things that they're not just doing in isolation. We all live in these systems. And in fact, what we're doing in a wellness circle, you've created a system now, and this is a system of support to help them in change. You could also give them a very concrete example of a storm. What if a teen walked in here to session 5 and said, I want to join the group, and you as the facilitator had already talked to this teen and decided that was okay? That would create a huge storm in your wellness circle, right? That's why you wouldn't do it, because once the group is formed and is performing, you don't want to disrupt that. You don't have enough time in a 6 session to integrate. If you were meeting for a whole school year, you could welcome that new person in, reform the system, and then it could perform again. And then we have this little note in their session about learning how to handle storms in a healthy way is important. Both our own storms and the storms of people around us. Another thing that I hear teens, when I teach this one, they say, boy, I have some friends who live in the storm. They never get out of storming. They call them, they love the drama. They're always caught up in drama. They seem to always be in storming. And I'm trying to choose differently. So again, we presented here to you in a very kind of didactic lecture way. Make this fun, bring it to life in your own creative way. Make it a discussion and help them to just think about that change is not just this individual journey, but that it is both something that affects people around us, and when the people around us, it affects us, and that again, that systems can either be supportive of change, or they sometimes can be one of the challenges and one of the barriers. And then also just help them to remind them this is such a core part of hopefully what they're learning in the wellness circle, as it says in here, when they're in storms, always reach out for help. That is sometimes counterintuitive. Sometimes when we're going through a storm, we want to pull into ourselves, or they want to pull into themselves, but they can always turn to a trusted adult when they're going through some kind of storm in their own life. So that's the teaching segment for session 5. And now we're going to turn to the coaching segment. So now for the coaching segment, you know the drill by now, and it's roughly about 30 minutes, and it's in page 58 in the facilitator guide. It's right after the breakout. Remember, we haven't talked about this for a while, but if you, for some reason, have a group larger than 10, usually when you get to the coaching is when you would break into smaller groups. But you do this combination of looking back and then looking forward. So they look back, you look at the the form they filled out, the map on page 20 in their participant workbook at the end of session 4. They check in with their next steps. They might even start to use some of the language of J-curves or zones, or maybe even they can already apply the systemic thinking here. But that's extra credit if they can do that. But you want to hear about their next steps and cheer them on and celebrate and encourage if they get stuck. Then we look ahead, and that would be filling out the map on page 22, where they can look ahead for this last week. The next session will be the last session of the Teen Wellness Circle, and so it's their last chance to really work on next steps that they can then come back in and share with the group. Then once again, they can stay with the same area. Maybe they've completed an area by now or completed their goals for that area. They can choose another area for 1 week to get started on that, or they can choose an area that's maybe related if they're feeling stuck in some way. So that's the coaching part for session 5. Turning back to the facilitator guide on page 58, we see that, as usual, we allow 10 minutes for the journaling and for the closing time. Again, that's flex time. I always like to try to make sure, though, that I can at least ask the question, even if they don't have time to journal about it. What's one takeaway? That one thing you're going to take away from this session tonight. And I like to do it because I'm always surprised. Sometimes what I think is most important, either in the lesson or what was shared in the group, is not at all what they spoke to them or connected with them. And that's the whole idea. They're the experts. And so I just like to hear and get that feedback. And it's also just a helpful thing for them to name out loud, their takeaway. So that's pretty much it for the How to Facilitate session 5, except that we have our usual closing whiteboard video that provides both a summary and a review of the key concepts of how to facilitate session 5 of a Teen Wellness Circle.